Hi, Sophie here. I made this recent video planning out an artwork using geometry nodes, and now that it's finished, I thought it would be fun to compare my plan to my final artwork, what changed, and did I achieve everything that I wanted to? Well, I mean, for one thing, I already failed on my inspiration. Okay, so I said it was to create monstera leaves, and yes, I was very inspired by this artwork, but really my idea had always been to create oval-shaped leaves with like ridges cut into them. Honestly, I have no idea how I would even get a heart-shaped leaf shape like this using the node setup that I used, because the first part of my plan was using a curve to mesh node setup to go from a single curved line into a 3D leaf shape. So this was step one in my plan. It was following this tutorial. I wasn't actually rewatching the tutorial this time around. I had originally followed the tutorial step by step to create this shape. So that's this node setup here. I wasn't quite making a leaf this time, but it still has that general leaf shape. And so to switch up my learning process this time, I copy pasted this node tree from that file, and I tried to recreate it step by step, one node at a time, just kind of going with my own intuition this time around rather than following a tutorial. I thought that was really useful in itself. I had to figure out in which order that I wanted to rebuild this node tree. That led to me having to restart because the order that I tried building it didn't quite make sense. It also led to me questioning why certain nodes had been used in the first place, trying to get around having to use them, like the resample curve nodes, only to discover that they were extremely essential. So this node tree branches in two directions. Both sides make use of a spline parameter node into a float curve node and then plugged into a multiply node. This first branch controls the thickness of the leaf. The multiply node kind of amplifies or diminishes this effect. And I can illustrate this with an instance on points node. Let me just give spheres as this instances. And let's join the geometry to see both. So this first resample curve node controls the amount of geometry along the sides of the leaf. Without it, the node setup didn't work, so I guess there's something like the geometry of the original stroke or the original curve just wasn't enough. So that's where the resample curve node, this first one, really comes in handy. And then this second node setup, it's similar, but in this case, it gives the leaf this sort of rounded or angular top. I personally went for more of an angular top, but it could have been more rounded as well. Different shapes for the leaf top like this. And so this was basically, instead of having a flat leaf shape like this, I could get a really nice curvature to it. The second resample curve node adds or diminishes the amount of points in this direction for the leaf. Also, without it, the node setup does not work right. We're not getting a rounded top. With this float curve node, we're kind of just getting, I don't even know what we're getting. It is making it not flat, but absolutely not in the way that we want to create a rounded leaf top. But yeah, in summary, this first part was just to create the initial leaf shape, pretty much just this. The second part of my 3-step plan, using a mesh boolean node setup to cut into my leaf shape with instances. This is where things really started to fall apart. I was using cylinders. I lowered the opacity quite a bit to cut into my mesh. And it was successfully making holes, but I hadn't taken into account that the instances of one mesh would also create holes in the other meshes if they were too close to them. And also, yeah, so you can see I'm moving the leaf and it's no longer cutting into two meshes, the instances. And I also didn't take into account that when I would rotate the leaf in edit mode, the instances wouldn't rotate with it. And so we were totally losing the effect of the leaf cuts that I wanted. I hadn't specified this when I made my planning video, but it had absolutely been my intention that I wanted to have all the leaves in my scene exist within one single object. I was really excited at the thought that I could just use the draw curve tool in edit mode to draw more leaf shapes and they would just work perfectly. But that was so not the result that I got. So the only solution I could think of was to embrace that I could only have one leaf per object. So this would both get rid of the issue of having instances cut into multiple leaf objects. And it also meant that now it would be possible to rotate the leaves, not doing so in edit mode, but going into object mode. I would have a lot more flexibility and freedom being able to rotate the leaf without losing the direction of the instance cuts. For the third part of my plan, selecting only specific points of my mesh for these instances that would cut into the leaf, that was following this tutorial by Arendelle, and I will say this took me a long time to figure out the combo of nodes that I needed to make this work. First up, I wanted to select only the points along the edge of my leaf. So to do that, we can do that with this top node set up here. So first we have an index node plugged into a floored modulo node. This is a type of math node. Give it a value of 15. So this value 15, it actually corresponds to the value of back here, this second resample curve node, the resample curve node influencing the geometry along the width of my leaf. So because it was set to 15, this math node also had to be set to 15. That is plugged into an equal node, and I'll just plug this into the selection of my instance on points node to show you what happens. So it's plugged into an equal node, and with this b value at 0, it is selecting the first side of the instances on this leaf. As I increase this value, you can see it's cycling through the different lines of points all the way up to 14, which is the other side. That's because it goes from 0 to 14. So if we count in 0, that's again 15 total values, also having to do with that resample curve node being set to 15. So then I'm once again using a math node set to add because I want both sides selected. So two equal nodes, one set at 0, one set at 14, plugged into an add node. And that is selecting the outer edges of my leaf. But I only wanted like 3 to 4 cuts per leaf. So like 3 to 4 points to be selected. So I had to combine this with a node setup for selecting rows. This much more complex. It's not that much more complex, but it is larger node setup down here. The node setup here goes from index to divide and then floor. These are both math nodes once again. The divide node also has that value of 15 from the second resample curve node. And then plugged into an equal node, I can cycle through the different rows of these points. In this case, it actually goes up all the way to 19 for a total of 20 different rows, counting that 0 is the first row. And that number 20 comes from this resample curve node. So at this point, I knew that I wanted multiple rows to be selected. And so I would have really loved to have found a solution using just like one equal node, but to have this value somehow be a multiple. Like let's say every multiple of 3 would get selected. I could not find a way to do that. And at this point I had some frustrating times with this node tree. So I was like, all right, we'll take the long way around, which is having multiple of these equal nodes, each selecting a different row and then adding them together with math add nodes. In this case, the add nodes can only add together 2 different nodes at a time. So I have 2 equal nodes added together, and then the results of these add nodes added together, which can give me a total of 4 rows selected. Depending on the leaf, sometimes I went for 4, sometimes I just stopped at 3. So I like bypassed this second add node. And that is how I selected multiple rows. But really what I wanted was I wanted to select only points that were both on the edges and belonging to one of these rows. And so for this, I used a boolean node set to and, so that this, the outer column selection and the specific row selection together gave me points only along the edges and also only along these rows as I can set them. Now this last step of my plan, which was creating instances to be the things to cut into my leaf shape, I actually surpassed my initial plan here. I went above my own expectations. So yeah, originally I was using cylinders as my instances, and it was working, but I wasn't really a fan of this like circular shape that it was creating for the cuts. I was really hoping to get a bit more of a natural shape, like a bit more tapered, kind of wider at the edge of the leaf, narrowing as it goes in. I tried a few different things, and then what actually ended up working surprisingly well, of all things, was a 4-pointed star curve. It took a lot of figuring out, a lot of playing around with the settings, and it's still not exactly the look I wanted to get, but it was definitely the closest that I managed to get. Not bad, you know. So this node setup looks like a 4-pointed star plugged into a fillet curve node, which just softens it a little bit, rounds the edges of it. And then this gets filled into a mesh, which I then extruded, and I made it quite tall. Just because, like, for the mesh boolean node, I just want it to be tall enough that it's clearing the whole leaf shape like this. Because yeah, plugged into the mesh boolean node, these instances are mesh 2 of the mesh boolean node. The initial geometry is mesh 1, and that makes these cuts. I'm still really proud that I found this solution at all. I think that doesn't look half bad. I was also able to turn the instances inward like I wanted to. I thought this was going to be way more of a challenge to figure out than it actually was. So that's this setting here. I have a position node plugged into an align rotation to vector node. This rotation plugged into the rotation value of the instance on points node. You can see how it looks without it. Clearly not ideal. And this is how the settings look. And with this factor, I can increase or decrease the effect of this turning. So happy with this. Another fun thing that I did not plan is I did want to have the cuts themselves be different sizes. So that's using a random value node plugged into the Y value of a combine XYZ node because I only wanted to impact the Y scale. So this is a random solution, and so I would play around with the seed value. And to be fair, most iterations of this did not look nice, did not look how I wanted it to, but I figured I only have so many instances that eventually I would find a seed that looked nice, and I did. Very happy with this. The last step of my node tree, I did give these materials a color. This is pretty much just a green material color. And then I was ready to start placing these leaves around my scene to create my 2D, 3D artwork. So in total, I created 4 variations of my leaves. Each one has a slightly different material color, and I also played around with some of the other settings, like the amount of cuts. Do any of them have 4 actually? No, I think they all just have 3. But I could have played around with the amount of cuts. And yeah, the overall size, shape, randomness of these cuts. I've been using the grease pencil line art modifier to outline the leaf, the individual leaf objects. And then I did also go in with grease pencil with a pen brush to just kind of add a bit of detail on top of the leaves. I'm drawing with stroke placement at surface to do this. And then with this base setup, all that was left to do was to start painting. This part of my piece I really didn't plan, and so I think it shows as I'm working on this piece. The colors ended up changing halfway through my process, the color palette. I went through a couple different color variations, but I don't really mind that. This was just a personal piece for me, and so in that case, I'm always happy to embrace a bit of a discovery process while I'm painting. And that discovery process finally led me to this final piece. In one way, I had to scale back my plan, and that was having each leaf be in its own separate object. Though I think my initial plan of having every leaf be in the same object was just unrealistic to begin with. But in most ways, I achieved what I set out to do, or even more than I thought I could. And also, given that my main goal was to use 3D objects to design a 2D artwork, and to get a cool painting at the same time as continuing to teach myself geometry nodes, I couldn't be happier with the results, honestly. So, thank you for watching. Thank you for joining me along on my journey learning geometry nodes. I'm so happy to have you here. I'll share blend files below. And if you'd like to see kind of like videos earlier, sometimes more in-depth and detailed videos than I post here on my YouTube, I do also have a Patreon where I post that kind of stuff. If you're a social media person, I tend to mostly post on Instagram, and I also have other project breakdowns, blend file downloads, brush packs, everything like that will be linked in the description. I appreciate any support, but no matter what, thank you for being here. I will see you very soon. Bye.